And we also have to make sure that we're doing that as well. You have to do both.
So you didn't answer the question. The question presupposed exactly what you just said. We know that you have to balance them. How do you balance them? That's the question. How do you balance them?
The answer is both are paramount, and we have to do both in each operation. But I will tell you this. There's no such thing for a police officer as no risk. They sign up, we sign up, the agents sign up to risk their lives. And they often go into very dangerous situations in order to do that. So there's no way to mitigate all of their risk, sometimes very dangerous risk from any operation.
And we understand that. We appreciate that. Now, I have to say that you didn't answer Mr. Massey's, our letters to you. I'm hoping that you said you're going to give us additional responses to the questions I've asked you today. I would anticipate that you'd give more fulsome answers than you gave us regarding the pipe bombing issue.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here. One major cause of migration into the United States is instability and violence in parts of Central America, which is partly fueled by the flow of firearms from the United States into Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. ATF reported that more than half of crime guns recovered in Central America, 70% of crime guns in Mexico, and 80% of crime guns in Caribbean countries are sourced from the United States, fueling instability and migration. But my Republican colleagues have refused to support common sense gun safety legislation that would fight the flow of American guns across the southern border and help address the root causes of migration. Instead, House Republicans have continued to criticize the Bureau, undermine resources to allow officers to do their jobs, and oppose common sense gun safety legislation at almost every turn. Could you describe any recent or current trends that ATF has found regarding the flow of firearms from the United States into Mexico and Central America?
So ATF's job obviously includes firearms trafficking. And one of the types of firearms trafficking we're seeing, right, there's domestic firearms trafficking that goes to California and New York and places all over the country. There's also southbound firearms trafficking. And it is accurate to say, and we shouldn't be reticent to say it, it's the truth, that our firearms that are going across the border southbound are helping to arm the cartels.
That's right.
So what do we see? We have 9 task forces that are southbound task forces set up along the border. They work with state and local law enforcement, they work with DHS, and we have the opposite problem, right? Other people are trying to stop things from coming north. We're focused on stopping firearms trafficking going south. They're related sometimes. But Congresswoman, what we see is that criminal organizations, including the cartels, are using our freedoms against us. So they're developing straw purchasing networks, for instance, where they're going into firearms stores and sending somebody in there without a record, paying them a small amount of money, and getting them to buy large military-grade weapons, 50s, that can be easily converted to machine guns down south, paying cash and doing it over and over and over again. So what are we doing? We're working with firearms licensees across the southwest border and now increasingly elsewhere because the cartels adapt, right? One of the things you asked about trends, they're going elsewhere now, not just on the southwest border. They're going to other states to try to arm themselves. So these are disturbing trends. These are very sophisticated, vicious organizations, and the ATF and our partners are doing everything we can. Interdictions, southbound interdictions are up in double digits year over year. We're very proud of that. But we should not fool ourselves that the problem is solved. These are very wealthy, aggressive, violent entities.
Thank you. When you were here last year, we discussed your partnership with state and local law enforcement to implement the Stop Illegal Trafficking in Firearms Act, which Congress included in the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. You've spoken about some elements, but could you provide any other additional update on your extensive efforts to implement that legislation?
Yes. So there were 2 separate criminal statutes that Congress created. One of them was a straw purchasing statute, first ever. The other is the trafficking statute. Both have been exceedingly useful, both in individual cases of firearms trafficking and in larger organizational efforts with respect to cartels and criminal organizations all over the country. So these are tools that we continue to use. We continue to work with the U.S. Attorney's community in appropriate cases to get appropriate punishments in those matters. There are new statutes. And again, as I said, what I explained to everybody and what we explained to judges is that firearms trafficking is not a victimless crime. We don't see the victim in front of us. But so often, the firearms, 60% of those trafficked firearms are going to felons and prohibited people. And they're using to hurt innocent, law-abiding Americans. That's what we have to do to implement. We have to make people understand that the distributors are also responsible if they're breaking the law.
And just quickly, many of the guns recovered from crime scenes south of the border are bought legally in the United States. How can we stop that from happening, and what resources do you need from Congress?
Well, when a firearm is purchased legally in the United States and it crosses the border, that's a little bit different, right? That's a situation where those whose full-time job it is to police the border are probably the lead. At ATF, what we do is we try to focus on illegal activity, the black market in firearms. Now, it's a little bit ambiguous, Congresswoman, because of course something can look like a legal sale, but it's really a straw purchaser.
Right.
And that's why when somebody walks into a store who doesn't even know really what to ask for, plunks down $12,552 in cash, and they're 20 miles from the border, and there's somebody waiting outside in the parking lot for them that dropped them off, that we depend on so many firearms dealers to figure out a way to pick up the phone and help us, and they do quite often. But then what happens is the cartels look for the one that won't do that, right? So we have to get the word out to a minority of dealers. Not the majority are trying to do the right thing, the minority of dealers, because the enemy, the cartels, are seeking them out to try to find weak links.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Dettelbach, I'm just curious, have you expressed remorse to Mr. Malinowski's widow and family?
I'm sorry.
Have you expressed remorse to Mr. Malinowski's widow?
I will now, and I have before this morning, yes.
What have you said to them?
Well, I said it here in open forum, but
What
what
have
I
you
said
to
was,
them
of course,
personally? Have you
when
talked
a
to
court-
them personally?
I'm sorry?
Have you talked to them personally? Have you expressed your sympathy to them personally? Or
Would
you
the
just make
gentleman
public
yield?
statements and issue press releases?
Would the gentleman yield?
No. Answer the question, please.
Yes.
He just did it.
All right, thank you. Did you know about this raid in advance?
We do 11,000 operations a year, and
did you know
I
about
believe
this
that, and it would
Did you
be.
know about this one, Mr. Dettelbach? Yes or no?
And I believe the first I heard about this matter was after the fact.
And who have you disciplined? What have you done?
Sorry?
What have you done in
is
response to
what
this?
we went together with the Little Rock Police, who were also present. We went and we requested an outside agency to do an independent investigation. We fully cooperated with that investigation. That investigation, my understanding is the file has now been turned over.
I think this committee is going to want to look into this matter in much greater detail. I need to press on. Let me just ask you a general question. What do you think is the purpose of the Second Amendment?
Like all the amendments, the purpose of the Second Amendment is to protect fundamental rights of Americans.
And you believe that a fundamental right of America includes the right to bear arms?
I believe that all the rights in the Bill of Rights are important and fundamental rights, including the Second Amendment.
Great. In the second half of 2021, only 34 inspections led to a firearms dealer having their license revoked. However, the number of qualifying violations dramatically increased to 252 in 2022 and jumped again to 407 in 2023. Since crooked firearms dealers, since Biden took over, there's been an exponential increase in zealotry by your agency. I assume you would say it's the latter.
The laws that Congress has passed and have been in effect say that willful violators of the Gun Control Act are subject to, they may have their licenses
We've
revoked.
seen an exponential increase. I mean, just off the charts since you took office. And that seems to coincide with a dramatic reduction in people willing to legally expose themselves to pre-dawn raids on their homes. The number of voluntary business closures post-inspection has risen sharply from 24 in 2021 to 69 in 2022 to 80 in 2023. Now, this tells me that this is a deliberate policy to drive firearms dealers out of the business, not only with the reign of legal terror, but in the case of Mr. Malinowski, the actual reign of physical terror as well. Now, I know you're not going to agree with that, but can you at least see how that appears to others?
Respectfully, I disagree. The enhanced enforcement policy, which is publicly available, the terms of it, state very clearly that we're not talking about paperwork violations. We're talking about willful violations that impact on public safety, like refusing to run a background check, selling to a felon,
What we're seeing is an exponential increase in actions against dealers, followed by an exponential increase in dealers just saying, this isn't worth the legal exposure, I'm out of here. What's involved in getting a federal firearms license?
There is a process to get a license, right? You fill out an application, you pay a $200 fee, and there's a compliance inspection, or not a compliance inspection, an application inspection that goes on. But just like the inspections and the process, for a revocation, for a compliance matter, there is ample due process. There are hearings that go on, and in our own hearings.
But it's a fairly lengthy process. Now, your agency's rule says, quote, that even a single transaction or offer to engage in a transaction, when combined with other evidence, may be sufficient to require a license as an FFL. What does that mean?
That is one sentence out of a 16-page rule.
Well, what does that
The
say?
rule says, this is a matter before the courts. Our positions on all of these things are in pages and pages of briefs that it would take far too long, and I know you have time limits, but I refer you to those briefs. It's not a secret, but what I would say to you is, it says black and white, things that might lead to a determination under the totality of circumstances that somebody is engaged in the business, and things that don't.
So if somebody admires my gun collection and I say, you want to buy it, would that require an FFL?
There is a specific provision that Congress has passed that says that people who are bona fide collectors can liquidate their collections without becoming a licensee.
But that's not what this rule
But
says.
of course you would have to, and I think that's what you described, but you'd have to look at, obviously, the whole.
That's not what your new rule says.
Respectfully, I disagree. It says in black and white
Gentlemen,
that is allowed.
Gentleman yields back. Director, we've been at it an hour and 45 minutes. Just recognize if you need a break, just let us know, and we'll be happy to take a break. If not, if you're willing, we'll keep going. Before I recognize the gentleman from California, you were getting ready to say you had an outside investigation and you turned it over to, and you didn't say who's that's been turned over to.
I believe they publicly announced, the Arkansas State Police, that they turned over their investigative file to the 6th District Prosecutor's Office. It's Pulaski County, Arkansas, the state prosecutors. And I believe this is all public. I haven't had contact with them because I want to make sure that it's independent, right?
Yeah.
But I believe that they're reviewing it.
Okay.
That part, I think we know that they're reviewing it.
Got it. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Director, welcome. And I want to thank you and the brave men and women in law enforcement who serve your agency every day. And I've got some questions for you in a moment. But there's something that is imminent and I'm concerned about because it just put a target on the back of everybody in law enforcement at the federal level and the local level. And that is a statement that one of our colleagues made earlier this week. And we have jurisdiction over the FBI as well as the ATF. But Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia said, the Biden DOJ and FBI were planning to assassinate President Trump and gave the green light. Does everyone get it yet? What are Republicans going to do about it? This is quite a concerning statement from an elected member of Congress, because this false statement creates the pretext for violence. It suggests to Americans, who, by the way, are armed to the teeth, we're a country where the most dangerous people have access to the most dangerous weapons, and it suggests to them that their own government and the people who wear the badge are out to assassinate the former president. And I just want to first clear up this falsity, and the FBI this week has issued a statement to do that. But first and foremost, the search at Mar-a-Lago, the former president was not there. And that was intentional. So if there was an effort to assassinate the former president, they went at a time when he was not there. Second, the former president was actually treated better than most people during a raid, because the FBI didn't go in with their raid jackets. They wore polo shirts to show a little bit of respect to the former president and not make it a raid-like environment. Third, standard use of force procedures were followed during that search, as they were followed in every search, including, fourth, the same search procedures and use of force policy that was used to retrieve documents at President Biden's Delaware residence. This is a pretext for violence, and I will yield to any of my colleagues who will join me in condemning it. I will yield to any colleague who will condemn the suggestion by Marjorie Taylor Greene that the FBI was out to assassinate former President Trump. Please condemn it, because if you don't, you are encouraging it, and you're co-signing it. Mr. McClintock, please.
Of course we do. What a ridiculous question.
What a ridiculous statement that she made.
I agree with you, and I don't think there's anyone here who agrees with it.
Thank you.
Both sides have a lunatic fringe in their movement, ours and yours. And frankly, I find yours far more frightening, because
I've never heard somebody suggest that we were trying to that the FBI was trying to assassinate a former president. I do appreciate, Mr. McClintock, you condemning. I would welcome anyone else who would condemn that. And we'll make this clearer when the Attorney
I would
General
also, however,
testifies.
condemn the instructions
And
to
reclaiming my
use lethal
time,
force
reclaiming my time,
in such an operation,
reclaiming
or
my time,
conducting such an
Director,
operation at all.
reclaiming my time. Director, the former president stated last week at an NRA convention that every single Biden attack on gun owners and manufacturers will be terminated on my first week in office, perhaps my first day. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. What does this mean for parents in America as it relates to whether our kids are going to be sheltering in place and hiding under their desks for the rest of their time at school if this were to happen?
Congressman, I can't and won't get involved in electoral politics. What I said in my opening statement, though, I think hopefully people from all sides of questions can agree on, which is we see progress being made. We see violent crime going down. We have a strategy that appears to be working. My hope is that we can all come together, and maybe there's policy disagreements on different things. We can all come together, though, on the fact that we are driving down violent crime all over this country and double down on the strategies that are working. That's my hope. The things that are working, let's stick with, because the numbers show that real lives are being saved.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is violent crime going down?
Excuse me?
Is violent crime going down?
According to the data I've seen, violent crime is going down, yes.
That's not what Director Wray told us a number of months ago when he was here before us.
What I've seen in recent numbers, violent crime is going down. There's in the 175 cities covered by the major city chiefs, there is double-digit reductions in violent crime. I was in Baltimore at the turn of the year, a 19% reduction in homicides. LA down 13%.
So when we had a hearing up in New York City just what was that, about a year ago, we heard from city councilors and others that they said that the police are not charging crime now because a district attorney would not prosecute that crime. And here, let me give you an example from a city in our state. Here was a statement from the district attorney in Milwaukee County This is a number of years ago, but he still continues to be the district attorney. Is there going to be an individual I divert or I put into a treatment program who's going to go out and kill somebody? You bet. This is the same guy that led off the Waukesha Christmas killer who drove a vehicle through, killing 6 people just a couple years ago in a Christmas parade up in Wisconsin. Are you sure violent crime's going down?
I believe the numbers bear out that violent crime is going down. I think last year saw the most precipitous drop in
So
violent
you cited
crime.
Minneapolis here in your testimony, whether it's indicting 45 Minneapolis gang members involved in murder and drug trafficking. We just had they have a district attorney in Minneapolis also that does not prosecute crime. She'll go after cops, as she's doing right now with a cop who was doing his job, and she's going after him now. Are you sure those indicted 45 Minneapolis gang members are actually going to be charged with a crime?
I was there to
Sure of
announce
that?
the indictment myself, along with the U.S. Attorney, along with the Chief of Police, along with the Sheriff. They're already indicted, and I hope they go to jail for a long time.
And I think you said that there's more activity with the cartels. You commented about this Sinaloa cartel. Is there more activity going on down by the southern border?
What we see is the flow of firearms. Our job is, right, to stop firearms trafficking, which goes from the United States to Mexico. And we have seen an increase in our number of seizures. Now, that increase could be due to the fact that we're spending a lot of time and resources trying to stop that. But yes, we see a continuing problem.
Yeah, Director Ray would echo that a number of months ago, or I should say you're echoing what he said. He said, we are seeing a significant increase going on related to the southern border. So you would basically agree with his comment.
With southbound traffic, it is a continuing threat.
Do you think the open border contributes to this?
So I am not in charge of the agency that controls the border, but with respect to southbound traffic, that's things.
You shared that with the Attorney General?
Well, I think everybody go ahead, I'm sorry.
Have you shared it with the Department of Homeland Security?
We work together on all of these task forces with the Department of Homeland Security, these southbound task forces. They have agents and officers sitting with us doing that interdiction for southbound firearms trafficking.
So they know this problem is getting worse.
Well, they're part of the fact of why the seizures are up, that we're interdicting more weapons than ever, double-digit increases last year in terms of southbound seizures.
So, Mr. Chairman, besides human trafficking, besides the terrorists that are coming across the border, we see another example here where the open southern border is making it potentially more deadly for Americans. We see these guns that are continuing to flow both ways across the border. And plus you have a border patrol that can no longer do their job as babysitters.
It is very rare. I'm sorry.
I'm going to close up here.
Sure.
If you have what would be your recommendation if somebody lied on their 4473 form? They dumped their pistol in a garbage can and it was in a school zone. What would be your recommendation for charging that person?
I think that echoes the fact of a publicly reported case. I'm not going to comment on a pending matter, and I think that question is aimed at that.
So it's an example of somebody that did something like that, and I'm sure it's happened before. What would you recommend they be charged with?
If a person out there intentionally lies on a 4473 form,
Yep.
They can be charged with the crime of lying on a 4473 form.
Dumped a pistol in a garbage can? So those are the facts of the case?
Again, I'm not going to
What would you
comment on
do?
specific facts. If somebody lies on a 4473, I mean, that was part of the charges in the case that we discussed earlier, that was the subject of so much discussion. That's public, but not commenting on the specifics, that's a crime.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to close real quickly. The dual system of justice in America, Hunter Biden versus Brian Malinowski. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry. Gentlelady from Vermont has unanimous consent?
yes, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record Milwaukee sees decline in homicides in 2023. This is WPR.
All right, without objection. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I also want to thank the gentlewoman
from Vermont for providing this committee and obviously those who are watching it with some sense of real semblance of the actual facts on the ground with respect to the comments made by my colleague from Wisconsin. Director, I first want to say thank you for your service to our country. You've spent your career in law enforcement, obviously a former federal prosecutor. I'm grateful for the work that you and your agency does each and every day to keep communities across my district in Colorado, and Rocky Mountain West, and the entire country safe. You have more patience than I. I think it is awfully rich, and I'm not asking you to opine on this or to respond, but it's awfully rich for some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to lecture you, who've spent your career in law enforcement, leading one of the premier domestic law enforcement agencies now, to lecture you about crime and gun trafficking when they have worked vociferously over the last 17 months to defund the very agency that you lead that is charged with addressing gun trafficking, is charged with keeping us safe. I think it is shameful. How much did President Biden's fiscal year 24 budget request identify for the ATF? What was the total sum?
I believe that the number that I'm very familiar with is the amount of the cut, which was $47.5 million, that was the real salary and expenses cut, which is causing us not to hire agents, was causing us not to be able to be out there with our state and local partners arresting carjackers and violent criminals. The request is 3 or 4 steps. It was a significant increase for ATF funding, and not only was the increase not granted, but ATF's budget was cut, and that's having these kinds of effects on our ability to fight violent crime that I'm talking about.
Well, you beat me to it, and thank you, Mr. Director, because I think you've provided the requisite clarity. $47 million cut. $3 billion less than what the president ultimately requested. $1.9 billion was the president's request in terms of funding for the ATF. Ultimately, it's about $1.6 billion, which meant in real dollars a $47 million cut.
Right. Went from 1.675 to about 1.625.
Correct.
And by the way, that happened halfway through the year because Congress hadn't passed a budget, and so we had to effectuate the entire $47 million cut in 6 months, which was also, Congress delays in passing these measures. I understand they're difficult, but for people running organizations, and many of you have run businesses, that is very, very difficult to effectuate a whole cut after somebody is giving you the higher budget for half the year and says, "Hey, make it all up in a half year."
Well, I'd like to hear any of my colleagues defend the propriety of pursuing that kind of cut to one of our nation's lead law enforcement agencies. The cognitive dissonance is astounding to me. I mean, I've listened for years to my colleagues on the other side claim that folks in our party don't support law enforcement, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. And yet, simultaneously, they now pursue a significant cut to the operations of the ATF. I'm grateful, and by the way, Director, I mean, this is outside of your bailiwick, so to speak, but they just released a budget a month ago that proposes severe cuts to local law enforcement as well. Rural sheriffs, rural police departments in my district, COPS grant program, which I'm sure you're familiar with, given your time as a prosecutor years ago. Program that is integral to enabling local law enforcement to do their jobs, to hire more officers. I think it's shameful. I'm grateful for what, as I said, you are doing. I wish I had more time to be able to spend or perhaps engage in a colloquy here around some of the regulations that the ATF has promulgated, which I support, to address some of the mass violence, mass shootings that we have tragically had in communities across the country, including in my community in Boulder, Colorado. But I would just say that the sum of my remarks is that I'm grateful for the work that you do. I'm grateful for the work that the law enforcement officers in your agency do each and every day. And you certainly will have our support. And I would hope that it be on a bipartisan basis. Hope springs eternal. We'll keep working towards that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What's your budget this year?
The budget, I believe, is $1.625 billion was the most recent budget that was passed.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. You know, I'm troubled here by your new rule defining what a firearms dealer is or engaged in the business of selling firearms. Isn't the purpose of it, or won't the result be that more people will be defined as being engaged in the business of selling firearms?
The purpose of the rule is to effectuate Congress's definition. Congress expanded the definition 2 years ago in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act.
What's the result going to be?
The result is going to be, I hope, increased compliance with Congress's statute.
The result is going to be subjecting more American citizens to the treatment that Mr. Malinowski unfortunately received from our federal government, which is you want to get more warrants to serve these no-knock raids on people who have not been convicted of anything, yet may be convicted on their doorstep to death. I want to address something in your rule here. I did find one thing that I think is sort of helpful, and I hope the other side of the aisle will read this. I want to give you time to look at this. The department, that would be the ATF, correct, in your rule?
I don't know what is this from the?
Yeah, this is from the rule.
The department refers to the Department of Justice.
Okay. The department also notes that the term gun show loophole is a misnomer in that there is no statutory exemption under the Gun Control Act for unlicensed persons to engage in the business of dealing in firearms at a gun show or at any other venue. I hope the other side of the aisle, this is the one useful thing that I found in 16-page rule and hundreds of pages of explanation, is to show people that there is no gun show loophole. Do you agree with the department and with your own rule here?
I agree that Congress never said, and has never said, and hasn't said now, didn't say before this, that somebody who is engaged in the business, those are the words there, can do that without a license depending on where they sit. But people have encouraged the perception, and we have seen an increased level of non-compliance among people who are either intentionally or otherwise breaking Congress's statute.
The people encouraging this perception is the left side of the aisle in the media. There is no gun show loophole, and I'm glad you finally admitted that. Now I want to get to something else.
I've said that publicly, and there never was.
Okay, thank you. I want to get to something else in your opening statement, and maybe you want to read it back if it's written down. Can you tell me the fact that you were expressing or claimed that there are more that firearms are leading cause of death for children? What were your specific words in your testimony?
I'd have to look at my testimony.
Can you look at it?
I think it's children and youth, and it's in my longer statement that's in the record. Obviously, I'm summarizing a statement as the chair asked me to do. So it's in my longer statement, which has been entered into the record. I don't have it in front of me.
Can you define a child and youth?
There's child and youth. There's a statistical study that is the source of that, and we can get that to you. I don't know the specific site sitting here. We'll be glad to get that to you.
Yeah, the statistical study, according to news reports and Snopes, as Mr. Nails referred to, excludes infants under the age of 1 and includes 18 and 19-year-olds. Is that true?
I don't know. I mean, honestly.
You don't know your own statistic?
No, I don't know. Honestly,
why
isn't
would that
any
be your
killing of
testimony to
children
Congress?
unacceptable?
Any killing of any person is unacceptable, except in self-defense. Are you including if a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old gang member came to a person's door and tried to attack them, that was self-defense? Are you including that in your statistic?
Congressman, firearms violence is a huge.
Yeah. No, I'm not going to let you make your public service statement. I want you to defend your sworn testimony. Are you claiming that 18 and 19-year-olds are children in your statistic?
And again, you have my statement.
Yeah, I have it. I'm asking you to explain it. Here's my other question. How many 18-year-olds who've committed a gun crime have you suggested be prosecuted as a minor?
We are a law enforcement agency. We're not the prosecutors.
Okay.
And in the federal system,
how many have you served? How many have
federal
you
system
gone after? Okay.
The federal, Respectfully,
18-year-olds.
we investigate crimes shoulder to shoulder with local law
Okay.
enforcement.
Are
and if they
18-year-olds children or are they adults?
Each state has its own
Under the gun
rules as
laws.
to when juveniles are prosecuted.
Federal gun laws.
Federal laws, as you may know, federal laws with respect to the prosecution of juveniles are exceedingly difficult. And you are correct that prosecution of juveniles, if you're implying this as adults, is rare in the federal system.
Here's the reality.
And
This is-
juvenile crime,
reclaiming my
juvenile
time.
crime is an increasing
Third
problem.
belongs to the gentleman from California.
Reclaiming my time. Look, you're including in your statistic, whether you know it or not, 18 and 19-year-olds, but you would never claim that those are minors in the context of gun prosecutions. And the only way you can get the number of deaths attributable to firearms above other causes is by excluding under the age of 1 and including 18 and 19-year-olds, particularly gang members, and including self-defense. So with that, I yield back.
Someone yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here. I want to thank you and I believe about 5,000 of your members, full-time employees at ATF. Just to put that number into some perspective, there are more than 6,500 sworn police officers serving just the city of Philadelphia, my home city. Would it be fair to call ATF a relatively small but mighty law enforcement agency, Director?
The people, those 5,000 plus people who work at ATF are incredible people. They are doing a mammoth job with very few resources. It's a dangerous job. Every single day, it's a dangerous job for them out there because of the types of cases that we often see. And they're doing a great job at it.
I agree with you. As you note in your testimony, ATF is in fact the only federal law enforcement agency with the sole focus of working with police and partners in state and local law enforcement to protect Americans from violent crime, correct?
We are the federal agency with the sole focus on violent crime.
I want to say to those of you in the room or who are watching on TV, if you're experiencing whiplash, I'm sure it is not lost on anyone in this room, anyone who cares about the issues around police and law enforcement. We are just 1 week removed from National Police Week. I sat over on the regal Senate side as we honored the fallen police officers. It's whiplash in this hearing. 1 week we honor fallen police officers, the next we want to defund law enforcement like you. From rooting out cartels, fueling the fentanyl crisis, to curbing gun violence, the #1 killer of American children, gun violence. That's what people on the other side of the aisle ought to be outraged about. The #1 killer of our children in this country, gun violence. And progress has been made, even though our Republican colleagues attempt to discredit and defund you. I want to turn to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I'm so proud that we were finally able to do something, some small things around gun violence. We are weeks away from the second anniversary of this great act, June 25th. I was heartened to see that last month, ATF finalized a rule implementing the landmark legislation. Part of the rule overlaps with my bill, the Fire Sale Loophole Closing Act, which would prevent FFLs who have had their licenses revoked or denied from selling old business inventory guns without background checks. Some Republican lawmakers have raised concern that the final rule goes too far. Could you tell us, why is this rule necessary? Why do we need to know what happens to those inventoried guns?
Again, of course, as you know, the rule is under litigation, so I'm limited to the public record and what I can say. The text of the rule speaks for itself and should be looked at, and also the explanation, the hundreds of pages of explanation and the response to comments. With respect to that one part of the law that Congress passed, and as part of the Gun Control Act, if a dealer who is a licensed firearms dealer loses their license, right, the notion that somehow for the person who loses their license can then not follow the Gun Control Act, right, is inconsistent with the structure of the Gun Control Act in many cases.
It's inconceivable.
So the idea is that everybody's playing by the same set of rules. There are so many dealers and collectors who are following the law out there. And part of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and part of our enforcement is to make sure that those who obey the law aren't being treated at a competitive disadvantage to people who are out there ignoring the law, right? It's only fair. There are so many people who are obeying the Gun Control Act, who are obeying the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and those who are out there ignoring it, just from a plain old business perspective, we have to have a fair marketplace where everybody obeys Congress's statutes.
I couldn't agree more. It's also common sense that if you've lost your license, you can't just get rid of your inventory without following the law.
Including background checks.
Exactly. What challenges have you had, has ATF had, faced in implementing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act? Litigation is clearly part of it, but what else?
I think when Congress gave us our new tools, which we're very grateful for, Congress didn't appropriate extra monies for us to enforce those particular new tools. We did get $1 million a year to work with the National Shooting Sports Foundation on the Don't Lie for the Other Guy campaign, which is an important collaborative effort we have with the industry. But the 500 cases, defendants that we charged under the new statutes with our prosecutors and our partners, right, that's taking away from other priorities that we also still want to service. So again, when we at ATF are choosing what to do, Congresswoman, we're choosing between very important things. We're choosing between body-worn cameras and cartels. We're choosing between gangs and carjackings. Those are very important things that we are trying to balance.
I couldn't agree more. I honor all of your agents. I have a unanimous request, consent request, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Number one, you spoke about fallen ATF officers. And what I would like to enter into the record is a listing, multiple page listing of fallen ATF officers, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive fallen agents.
Without objection.
Over the years. I also have a unanimous consent request to enter this article from March of this year, ABC News, U.S. stats show violent crime dramatically falling.
Without objection.
And I'd like to also enter into the record an article around a child in Philadelphia just last month, 3-year-old child, sadly picked up a firearm and died from a shot.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank the chairman. Thank the director. I think as the director knows, I was a prosecutor under Project Safe Neighborhoods in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Worked closely with ATF in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I share your sentiment about the patriotic Americans serving in ATF trying to stop violent criminals from moving drugs and using firearms against the law in ways that are undermining the safety and security of the American people. And I want to thank those men and women for what they do every day in that service. But would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right? I realize that with respect to the case we've already discussed with respect to Mr. Malinowski, that you're saying that's an investigation, but what about something like Fast and Furious?
So of course, like any agency, there are times where we don't get things right and can improve.
So a couple of questions for you, along these lines. I think it's really important for the American people to understand. Do you, as the director of ATF, do you believe that the American people have a constitutional right, an individual right, to keep and bear arms?
The Supreme Court has made it clear, and yes, the Second Amendment has been interpreted numerous times by the Supreme Court, just as you, there's more to it, but yes, what you have said, yes.
Okay, and so but you believe that. You interpret the Constitution that way.
I interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted. And when the Supreme Court speaks on something...
Would you have said that about Plessy?
Congressman, I work for a law enforcement agency. I'm not a judge.
But
I
I'm just
accept
asking
the
you,
rulings of the court, including that one. I'm not dodging your question.
Do you, as the director of ATF, believe there is an individual constitutional right to bear arms?
Yes, there is one. The Supreme Court has said it.
It's along those lines. Do you, as the director of ATF, believe that the federal government should maintain a registry or otherwise track, catalog, keep records of the transactions of firearms conducted by the American people, such that you would know what firearms I possess?
Congress has explicitly forbidden ATF from keeping a registry, and we do not. Again, we obey the law. We don't make the law, we obey it.
Do you, as the director, believe that the federal government should track ownership of firearms among the American people?
Congressman, we follow the law as you put it, as you pass it. You have said we cannot have a registry. We follow that provision and will continue to as long as it's
As
the
the
law.
director of ATF, do you have a position on that? Should we track ownership of firearms?
As director of ATF, my position is if it's in the law, we follow it.
If I want to sell a gun that I currently own to a friend in Texas, do I need a license?
So the getting into the specifics of the rule, which is in litigation. So first of
This
all,
ought to be a really simple question.
I understand. Well, so you look at the totality of the circumstances. If we're talking about an isolated sale from somebody who is not engaged in the business of dealing firearms, you don't need a license.
All right, so if I, a citizen, this country, I live in Texas, I have a weapon and I want to sell it to a fellow Texan, on an isolated basis, do I need a license?
Again, if you are not engaged in the business of selling firearms, those are Congress's words.
If I post a sale for a firearm last year, okay, and I do that on some relevant website like TexasGunTrader.com, and I sell that weapon, I sell it for $500, and then I inherit a gun from my dad or from my uncle, and I inherit it last month, and it's like 6 months later, and I sell it, for another profit. I sell it for $500. And then less than a year later, I have another weapon that I inherit or I've got and I decide I don't need anymore and I sell it. Is that engaging in the business? Is that engaging in activity that means I need a license?
I think pursuant to the clear language of Congress in doing this and to the things we've said in the rule, we specifically mentioned inheritance as one of the things that is not indicative of engaging in the business.
What if I have just 12, what if I have 12, 15, or 20 weapons and I sell 3 over the course of a year?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just saying, if I have about 50, let's assume I had 15 or 20 weapons and I wanted to sell 3 over the course of a year.
I think my
I'd like to make money on
my
them.
reaction to what you're saying is that you look at it's very clear that you look at the totality of the circumstances. We can go through an endless series of hypotheticals. Hypotheticals aren't the way we address cases.
Do you understand, and I realize I'm over my time, do you understand why the average citizen sitting out there saying I've got 400 pages of rulemaking might not understand what they are allowed to do under the law when the director of the ATF can't look at a member of Congress and tell me yes or no emphatically whether or not if I sell a weapon or 2 weapons or 3 weapons or 5, whether or not I need a license? Do you think that's the way the law ought to be or the rules?
Respectfully, I believe that the rule that we have promulgated provides way more information and clarity than
400 pages?
than just the 1 or 2 sentences that Congress provided. And we were seeing
And you can't
massive
even answer it.
noncompliance.
How can the average American know it?
Time of the gentleman has expired.
We are in the business of knowing, and we would look at the whole case, and we would determine based on the, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Dettelbach, for being here the second time in over a year and for your commitment to keeping our community safe. As requested by the Department of Justice, the ATF recently reported that over a 5-year period from 2017 to 2021, 68,000 illegally trafficked firearms were distributed across the United States by unlicensed dealers. The iron pipeline, which we've discussed earlier, specifically refers to guns smuggled up the I-95 corridor from the southern states to the mid-Atlantic and New England. It runs directly through my home state of North Carolina, which is one of the top destinations for gun traffickers. Now, we wouldn't know this information, which directly impacts public safety in my state, without the ATF's dedicated work to make data available to the public and to all of our law enforcement agencies. This data is a critical tool for local law enforcement to address gun trafficking. I also want to highlight the implementation of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which, as we've heard, is one of the most significant steps Congress has taken to reduce gun violence in decades, giving law enforcement and prosecutors new means to hold gun traffickers accountable. I also want to note that both of North Carolina's Republican senators voted for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in the last Congress. Building off this legislation is imperative, and it will take continued bipartisan consensus to do so. We've talked a little bit about the gun trafficking provisions in the Safer Communities Act, but I want to broaden that a little bit and ask you how gun trafficking intersects with drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl trafficking, and what ATF is doing to reduce not just gun trafficking and gun violence, but the menace of fentanyl and other dangerous drugs.
I've been involved with prosecution since 1991, and one thing that has stayed the same, and unfortunately I'm sure will stay the same, is that guns and drugs, illicit guns and drugs go together. Gangs, cartels, individual dealers, they are armed often as a means of enforcing their business practices, their unlawful criminal conduct, and punishing individuals who challenge them. Intimidating witnesses, you name it. So these things go together. With respect to fentanyl, that is also, it was true with crack, it's true with powder cocaine, true with heroin, it's true with opioids, it's true with fentanyl. And we worked alone and together with our partners on cases that involve narcotics trafficking all the time for that reason. Armed drug trafficking organizations are part of what ATF does. Just earlier this month, ATF made a case that resulted in members of the Sinaloa cartel going to jail for literally decades, I think one for life. We are routinely seeing fentanyl dealers and organizations that are armed to the teeth and that are threatening people's lives.
And so do you believe that the more we support efforts to stop gun trafficking, that will also help in our efforts to stop drug trafficking?
I know it.
I'm going to ask you a fun question since I know it's been kind of a rough day. If it was Christmas...
And crime gun tracing. I would continue and ramp up our campaign to get sheriffs, to get chiefs, to get law enforcement officers all around the country to fully participate in the NIBIN and tracing free tools that we provide them. And I think, gosh, it's so hard. On the third, I would say, I think, I would double and triple down on our RICO Vicar gang strategy. It's a very effective legal tool that puts into effect the crime gun intelligence. The Minneapolis case is a great example. So they have 15, 20 shootings all around town. They look totally unconnected. Through the crime gun intelligence tools we provide, we're able to connect them together and show that it's the Highs, that's the name of the gang, one group that's responsible for all of this. And so then we put together a RICO case, which has extra teeth, in order to make sure we're taking down the whole organization. So I think that would be my third.
Thank you for your service, and I yield back.
I think it's interesting that the director didn't mention body cameras, even though he told us that they weren't wearing those because of budget cuts, but that didn't make his Christmas list. The time is now. The gentleman's from North
I did ask for extra missions, though.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the Malinowski killing, did you say you're deferring to and waiting for this investigation from the Arkansas State Police?
The Arkansas State Police has referred the matter to the district attorney's office. It's my understanding from public
You've
statement.
been deferring until that to take any action yourself. Is that right?
That would be our normal course of action if there's a pending criminal investigation. In order to make sure that we preserve the integrity of that investigation, we let it proceed. Yes.
So that's a criminal investigation only.
They'll decide the scope. My understanding is they're investigating to see.
That's a criminal investigation. Let's stay on my question. That's a criminal investigation.
It's an investigation to see whether Arkansas law was violated, is my
That's called a
understanding.
criminal investigation, right? They're a criminal law enforcement agency. Don't filibuster me. Straightforward.
I'm not filibustering. You know that state prosecutors have
All right,
a variety of
That's
different.
my time. The Arkansas State Police, in their press release on April 24, 22, said, "We do not have the authority to address methods and tactics used or whether agency protocols and policies were followed." Have you seen that?
I've seen the press release
You've
that they
seen
have.
that?
Correct.
So you're deferring action on questions of methods and tactics until you see what Arkansas does with the criminal investigation?
That is the normal standard thing that we do, because if you start interviewing witnesses, if you start talking to people in the middle of a criminal investigation, very quickly people start talking about the fact that the integrity of that investigation.
Mr.
It's
Dettelbach,
very important to
Dettelbach and the Breonna did you watch yesterday's hearing by any chance?
I did not have a chance to watch
Okay.
all of yesterday's hearing. I watched.
Did you watch some of it?
I watched some of it.
Well, in the Louisville situation with Breonna Taylor, the Metropolitan Police Department there fired its first officer within 90 days of the incident. They were doing that as a matter of their management responsibility. By the way, the Justice Department, of which your agency is a component, has conducted a pattern and practice investigation and is pursuing enforcement action against the Louisville Police Department. What is your excuse for not taking managerial action about the appropriateness of the tactics used in the Malinowski killing?
I think you would agree with me that police officers and agents are entitled to due process just like everybody else.
There's no doubt about that. That
Well,
doesn't answer my
well,
question.
well,
Don't you
when-
have management responsibility with respect to the way the agency is conducting such matters?
When we can, based upon the review, and I don't expect it to be a lengthy period of time, we would conduct use of force review as we do in every matter like this that occurs, and we will do that in this case as we do in every matter.
Well, what's soon enough? They acted in Louisville within 3 months. What's soon enough?
Respectfully, we'll see that the investigation will end, and then we will commence our internal review as we always do.
Concerning body cams, you testified that the rollout within ATF was incomplete. Is it your testimony that the rollout has not extended to ATF personnel in Arkansas, and that's the reason they didn't have body cams?
The field division that covers Arkansas has not yet been implemented. That's correct.
Okay. And you said, what did you say the cost was of your item there? Something in the tens of millions. Was it 40 million, 45 million?
This isn't the downstream costs because there's huge data costs, as you know, with this. But the initial implementation
body cams
cost, the request in the budget is $37.5 million.
37 million. So I understand your budget's about
37.8.
1.7. Well, your budget's about 1.7 billion. So if my calculator's right, that's about 2.6% of your budget. You couldn't find 2.6% of your budget to catch up with common practice among also resource-constrained city police departments all over the country?
Respectfully, our budget is not 1.7, it's 1.625.
Whatever.
And the reason I know that is because that $45 million cut has resulted in not being able to hire agents.
Yeah, but you're
It has
talking about
resulted in
something else.
cutting-
I'm talking about body cams that are in common use among metropolitan police departments across this country. And you're saying something that involves 2 or 3% of your budget prevented you from getting it done?
I'm saying that we're in the process, as we said from the beginning, of implementing the policy in phases.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Director.
We continue.
Mr. Director, let me ask you this question. I understand there could be justifications for lots of things about putting tape on, jamming signals, things like that in a certain set of circumstances. What can possibly justify deferring, as that video showed, deferring the execution of that search warrant until the person who justifies the use of such tactics, if there's a question of a risk of violence, was present in the home?
These are career law enforcement agents
I didn't
and police,
ask that.
and
I
they
asked
make
you-
determinations.
I asked you what could possibly justify that.
In my experience, when an agent decides, when a cop decides to go through a door, when a cop decides to execute an operation, they are entitled, if they're correct, the warrant allowed that warrant to be executed on the day it was executed. We'll see what the investigation says, but Congressman, armchair quarterbacking police officers who are risking their lives without evidence yet is not the way to go here.
That's about 5,000 words and not one justification uttered, not one possible justification. My time has expired.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director. Good to see you again. I just want to run through a few things, some which strike me as surprising, some are just hypocritical. And I'll ask you some questions at the end, but I did want to deal with a couple of these at the top. The comparison to the Breonna Taylor case struck me as quite surprising. Breonna Taylor was a scenario where no shots were fired at the officers. I think one of the officers actually made a false statement. Breonna Taylor certainly didn't fire any shots at any of the officers. There was the officer who was fired, lied in the affidavit. I think that was found pretty quickly. But in any event, the no-knock issue I think is a pretty significant one. And I believe that what's going to happen later today is that there will be a bill offered, the George Floyd Criminal Justice Act, that will help to address one of these issues. So I hear a lot of concern from my Republican colleagues about the no-knock warrant being executed here. I would note that it's pretty routine the way this warrant was executed, but hopefully you all will be willing to support that provision when it's offered today. Mr. Director, did you want to comment on that?
I just wanted to say that, I just wanted to repeat again that because this is an ongoing investigation, I'm not commenting. There are numerous different things that I believe that are out there that may not be shown to be the facts when the investigation happens. So I would just hope that we could all agree to wait till the facts come out and assess those facts, because I hear things that may well not even be correct as a factual matter as things that members are talking about. So that's one of my hopes here today, is just to try and get the facts out.
Well, that's a fair point, but I'll say this. I know that an officer was shot in the execution. I don't have time, I'm sorry. In the execution of the Malinowski warrant. How is that officer doing?
Thank you for asking. My understanding is that he's recovering, and I can take a lot, and I understand that, but one thing I want to say is at one point during, people are heated, somebody said something about somebody got shot in the toe. When a police officer or an agent is shot at, it's a serious matter. When a police officer or an agent is actually shot, it's a serious matter. And I know that nobody here would try to minimize an officer being shot as not being a serious matter. I just want to make sure, I understand people are heated, and maybe I got a little heated just now, but that's one thing that I just want to make sure that I know we all agree on that.
I appreciate that. And also the funding issue, which Mr. Neguse addressed, with respect to paying for body cameras. I know it was a very expensive thing when we did it in Prince George's County, and it was one of the barriers to getting it done as quickly as we wanted. But I hope that's another one of those where my Republican colleagues, since you've expressed such strong desire and concern about body cameras not being present here, I hope you'll be willing to step up now and provide the additional funding in the ATF budget so they can move forward with that expeditiously. I also wanted to say this too. We had another debate a few minutes ago about whether firearms are the leading cause of death for children, and the issue, I guess, was, do you count infants or 18 or 19-year-olds or whatever? I just want to reiterate, because that's not the first time we've done that one, and my view then and now is that I think it's a ridiculous point to focus on from the standpoint of whether it's first or second is a leading cause of death. Isn't that enough? I mean, why should we be okay with it? Just, let's say it's the second leading cause of death if you include infants or something. Why would that be okay? Why wouldn't we be concerned and want to try and find ways to bring those numbers down? So, I appreciate the work that you're doing on that front and support the effort. But, we have to find ways to protect our kids from these kinds of gun violence incidents. And with respect to the search warrant affidavit, I wanted to offer that in the record. I ask unanimous consent that that be offered.
No objection.
And also the search warrant return, I want to make sure that's in the record too. So it's clear what was, in addition to an officer being shot, which did not happen in the Breonna Taylor case, the weapons that were recovered, but also the other types of conduct that supported the probable cause finding by the judge in that case and supported the entry. And then the last point I wanted to make too, the execution of a search warrant while the people are in the house in the morning, my experience was that was kind of standard operating procedure. It's actually unusual to do it any other way. And the reason for that is it's safer for the officers to try and catch them by surprise, and also leads to better opportunities to seize weapons. So in this case, there were many, many, many. And because they thought there were 150 weapons in the house, for the officers would be a prime consideration. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you. Director Dittelbach, I wanted to follow up on something that Representative Massey was asking you about January 6th pipe bomb investigations. It's over 3 years since it happened. What are you still investigating?
We are not the lead investigative agency. It's the FBI. My understanding is from public really reported there's been over 1,000 interviews conducted. They're investigating the incident.
But it seems like it's like you have a roadmap and FBI not to answer questions. Everyone came here and every question we ask, everything under investigation. It's very clever. You guys brilliant not to answer Congress because everything under investigation, and then when investigation ends, statute of limitation and over, no one gets punished and you continue with this. And this has happened all the time. It seems like your agency should do better than that, investigate something over 3 years. It seems like you should get to some conclusion. But my question is related to these changes under your rule and definition, what is engage in business rule. Do you think criminals that want to do something criminal are going to read your 500 pages of definitions? Are they going to read your 500 pages of definition explanations?
I think that, I don't know who will read it, but
Or do you think criminals will be doing that?
I think that it will also encourage, as I said at the beginning, hopefully increase compliance with the law among people who
So you understand that criminals are not going to be reading this, okay? But what is it going to do to law-abiding citizen like Brian Malinowski that potentially was just doing, selling these guns, and I don't know the whole circumstances, but he's dead because he was not probably realizing what you were doing in changes of this rule. So my question is for you is going to be, do you understand how dangerous your definitions have become?
Respectfully, our definitions are based upon the law that Congress passed, and it is based upon our observation and experience in the field.
Your interpretation. So let's just go to your definitions. As a normal American, so I understand your definition.
Implementation. It's implementing Congress's law.
Okay, how are you going to implement? I want to understand. I am a gun owner. And I'm going to decide occasionally, say, guys, occasionally I can do maybe 100 times, maybe 5 times. You know what? I am not engaged predominantly a profit. That I don't even have time to do a profit. So at which point, as a regular American citizen, so I understand that you are not going to show up, cut off my electricity, show up to my house, and try to storm the house with a bunch of people that you don't even realize what's going on. So I can be in a situation like a lot of other Americans that not even realize that now you're redefining who the dealer is. So I want to get understanding. Summarize me understanding how I can explain to my constituent what it means now and how I am predominantly earn a profit in this. What is really definition of that?
The statute that Congress passed says that if you're engaged in the business of dealing firearms, quote, predominantly for profit, right, that requires a license. There are some exceptions then that Congress has passed, and respectfully, people may not read the statutes either. They should, though, if they're selling firearms. These aren't possessors. These are people who are reselling firearms repetitively for profit. And I don't think it's too much to ask for somebody who is selling firearms repetitively for profit.
So what is repetitively means? What is occasional repetitively? If I decide, I have lots of guns and I decided to, I want to replace with something else. I have 50 guns I'm going to sell this year. You just decide that I'm for profit. I don't know, maybe they will be for profit. Definitely no one, was going to sell it at a loss, right? And with your rules, probably prices I keep increasing. So I'm going to become a dealer now? I have to be registered in that?
Again, I've tried to explain, and I'll
No, I'm
continue
trying to explain. So what do you do? What is really going to be now your new definition? Because it's so broad.
It's not a new definition. It implements Congress's definition. Congress changed the
Yes, and
definition.
you put 500
Congress-
pages of explanation. So can
No,
you
it's a-
summarize
it's
it
a-
normally plain language and American can
I
understand?
I believe that our positions are, they're not secret, they're in
Yeah,
court,
but
they're
explain
filed.
without reading 500
The
pages
rule-
that are
The
confusing.
rule seeks by providing practical, conduct-based things that normal people could,
Yeah,
for
so
instance,
please
for
explain.
instance, one of the things that can result in people, depending on all the circumstances, is you take credit cards for payment. That could be one of the signs that somebody's in business. You read, one of the things that
So, like,
might
so
be
if
on
I
the
use some
other
little
side.
app and then I
one of
sell
the
a gun
things-
and take a credit card and potentially will be a dealer?
One of the things that might be on the other side is if you're occasionally dealing or gifting to family members, right? We try to say things on
My
both
time
sides.
had expired, but I'll tell you, you put American lives in danger and your ATF life agent in danger by doing this, because you're doing gun control. It is a very clever way to make everyone in dealer have a zero tolerance and exercise gun control and Second Amendment rights. But you put your people in danger and American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on the discussions that we've had on the leading causes of death for children that have been spoken about by our colleague from Pennsylvania and also Mr. Ivey, I'd like to ask a unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from April 2022 entitled "Firearms were the leading cause of death in children in 2020." Researchers say also a second one will be unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from October titled "Firearms Now #1 Cause of Death for U.S. Children While Drug Poisoning Enters Top 5."
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlelady from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, for being here. I know it's been a long day. Thank you for your time. So as I sit here, I'm really struck by what I feel we should be talking about here is that we have a fairly simple mandate from the American people, which is to do all we can to stop gun violence. As my colleagues have said, we have this horrible situation in this country, parents, teachers having to see children being killed every day by gun violence. The country is awash in illegal firearms. We've heard that. We have accidental shootings by and of children. We have increasing suicide rates. And of course, mass shootings across our nation. And public poll after public poll tells us the same thing. People want us in Congress to do something, to take action. More than half of Americans consistently support stricter gun laws. Listening to some of my colleagues, you'd think that we were on a different planet. The majority is not even approaching or discussing new public protections or stricter gun laws. And the ATF doesn't have the resources to inspect firearms dealers as directed by Congress. Right now, over 2,000 firearms dealers have not undergone any inspection in over 10 years. There are laws already on the books to help us stem the tide of this violence, but they aren't being enforced because oftentimes Republicans won't give them the money to do so. Now, Director, I appreciate very much that you're here today. I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about the work that ATF does. You got a big job. How does your agency carry out its mission with just over 5,000 employees?
It's very difficult.
It's shockingly low, given
but the
your
way
charge.
look, the way we do it is we have an incredible workforce. I mean, the career people, I'm the only political appointee at ATF. Not a single Schedule C person, just me. The people who are the career people get the credit here. These are agents, these are investigators, lab technicians, analysts, staff. They do incredible, dangerous work every day. And the only way to make any progress on this is partnership with our state and local partners, which we're better than anybody else with respect to others at. And number two, being smart about how we use the intelligence that we provide to identify the worst of the worst, to make sure that we are actually taking steps to do two things. Number one, identify the worst of the worst, the trigger pullers and the shooters, and get them out of the community, rated bluntly, and also, at the same time, to do something to enforce the existing laws to cut off the supply of guns to those same people. It is far too easy for killers, felons, gang members, rapists, domestic violence people to get firearms, even though the law and everybody agrees they shouldn't have them. So you have to do both of those two things. It's a two-part strategy. And there are people who only want me to do one, and there are other people who only want me to do the other one. And the fact of the matter is, you're not going to make progress unless you have a reasonable approach on both.
So to follow up on that, how do you go about making those decisions about priorities? And are there functions that you unfortunately have to deprioritize due to the resource constraints that you have? And what are those?
So you make the decisions based on data, as best the data that you can find in real time. It's not always perfect. And there are areas of this country where I wish that we would have more agents. The New York City is an example. So in New York City Police Department is 36,000 strong. I have about 30 people in New York City. It is absolutely, and we punch way above our weight, and that's the case everywhere. So we are making decisions about where the crime threat is. When I make an investment on the southwest border, as we have, not I, we have, at ATF, that means at ATF that we can't start up a whole new division. That means we're pulling agents from some other place that we really care about. So we are constantly struggling to balance resources in the best way we can to face a lot of threats.
And Director, you know, I'm just about out of time, but I think it's clear that without substantial funding, we are not going to improve our statistics on gun violence, and we're not going to improve our public safety outcomes. We should be putting the money to work to help protect our kids. I say that as a member of Congress. I also say that as a former teacher, and I'm a parent of 2 teenagers.
Of that case. And we could sell 6 a.m. and standard operating procedure. You can do that everywhere else. I've represented 3 officers and officers involved shootings. I spent 10 years dealing with search warrants. I know the facts of this case. I know where the guy worked. I know that he was surveilled. And I know that they chose to implement a warrant in a way that absolutely maximized the risk of harm, both to the person being served and to the officers serving the warrant. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to something else quick. Federal gun charges are what we call strict liability crimes, right? If you have a gun and you're a prohibited person, that's the crime. There doesn't need to be intent. There doesn't need to be any of those things, right?
I disagree.
So if you're a felon in possession of a firearm, you can say, I didn't know I was a felon?
No, but there's an intent requirement in Congress's statute. You can read 922G1. It's in the statute, Congressman.
You said earlier that ATF's responsibility is to implement the laws that Congress passes, right?
Correct.
When did the U.S. House pass a rule classifying a pistol brace as a short-barreled rifle?
That rulemaking is based upon the National
When did Congress
Firearms
pass a law? When did
1934.
Congress pass a law? They didn't.
In 1934, Congress passed the National Firearms Act, which said that short-barreled rifles were